Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. Yes, today is Friday. Test is behind me. I made a note of it in the short yesterday when I came on just for a couple of seconds to just tell you that I had completed the test and that everything was okay. But today I'm going to go a little bit more deeper into what happened, what actually transpired yesterday. That was kind of amazing, and it really coincided with what Sunshine had told me yesterday during the meditation. And I was really surprised by that because I don't know, I didn't not believe what she said. I just was like really surprised at how everything just fell into place, how everything paralleled everything that she had told me during the meditation yesterday. So it was kind of amazing. So now I'm going to pull a card and I'm going to see what the Gilded Tarot has to say. If I can keep from like letting the cards fall on the floor while I'm trying to shuffle them. But we'll see what the cards have to say today and see what is in store. The meditation today will be a little bit different than the ones in the past because I really do go into a lot of detail about what happened yesterday. So I don't know if you're interested in that, but that is where the meditation went. And hopefully, maybe it'll help other people who are maybe facing the same thing that I faced yesterday, or I don't know. But at any rate, let me just give these a good shuffle here. Nigel just said stop. And so I'm going to stop and I'm going to pull the card from the top. And here we go. I got the Nine of Cups. One of the happiest cards in the deck. And as you can see, the man is raising a cup to everything with 8 cups still sitting on the barrels. This card seems to really depict how I feel right now. That I am very happy that that this is one of the happier cards in the deck, and this is where I'm at. This is me raising a glass to everyone here who's listening, who supported me during this test experience, and who are still here to listen to me bramble on about it. So here we go. This is really a very positive card, and I'm feeling inclined to pull another card to see what comes up next, just for giggles. The Hermit. Interesting that the Hermit came up because when I describe his Allah in the meditation, you'll see why I'm really not surprised that this card does turn up, because there is that sense of, with all the stuff that was going on. So I'll explain this after the meditation, but this is very interesting that this card comes up. So here we go. Today is day number 13. It's April 25th, 2025, and here we go. I said, I have an attitude of gratitude. And Nigel says, I can see that. You really tapped into this knowing that all is well. I said, I did, but it was strange. Everything that Sunshine said yesterday actually happened. Nigel said, do tell us about it. I said, okay, so I left home yesterday soon after the meditation had ended. My thoughts were pretty calm. I decided to walk to the club station, which is about 2.5 kilometers away from here. I just had a feeling that all would be well. It was after I reached the station that I needed for this diploma. And now I'm not totally worried about whether or not I get the diploma, but I just had this really good feeling. And Nigel says, feeling like you had this, that you were in a control of the events going on around you. And I said, yes, exactly. I wasn't really worried at that point. The energy was kind of amazing, though. But it was also the idea of trust. I kept thinking that for 2 days I had pulled the Sun card, and while Professor Einstein had said that the cards will not be a predictor per se, that all would be well. But there was no denying the impression that getting the most optimistic card in the tarot 2 days in a row was a pretty good indication. Nigel said, did it not show you that we, as your guides, are directly involved in the act of you pulling cards? You did get a sense of that when to stop pulling cards. The same could be said when you use the rods. You asked Sunshine at your friend's summation had been accurate, and she said no. Then when you found the keys, it backed up her summations. She also accurately predicted that you yourself would not find the keys, but that someone else would, and that you would just simply assist in the search. I said, yeah, that was pretty freaky. Nigel said, so what happened after you got to the station? After you got that station? I said, I noticed that the bands were pretty quiet, and I was getting hungry, so I decided to pack up and go into town. When I got into town, I'm walking first to the bank to check my finances. Then I went to get some lunch. I had taken the notebook with all of the questions and answers with me. While I ate, I casually flipped through the pages and read several of the questions. Most of them I concluded that I knew, and that was pretty uneventful. At the restaurant where I was having lunch, it filled up, and I decided to finish my meal and leave. It was close to 2 p.m. when I left, and I had about an hour before I had to be at the test center. It was raining, so there was little point to going to a park, so instead I just went to a junk shop and had a look around. About 10 minutes later, I left. Usually I find little nickel or dime items to buy, but this time I didn't buy anything. While I was there, a fleeting thought entered my mind and about where this stuff was actually produced, which might have impacted my not buying anything anyway. Nigel said, you always love stuff at that shop, specifically stuff for sewing. I said, yes, but yesterday I didn't. Maybe I just didn't want more stuff. It felt almost spiritual in nature, but I can't say for certain. At any rate, after I left, I wandered back down the street in the direction, and at that moment it was about 2:15. I decided to go into our local bookstore. It was there where I had bought my first citizenship book, and back in 2018 thereabouts. I had also bought the book for the B1 test. It's a small shop with not a lot of merchandise on stock. I realized that I was just wasting time until the test. And Nigel said, why did you think that wasting time was a good way to go? I said, I'm not sure. There was just this voice inside telling me that maybe I should go to the test center a little bit early, so I decided to stop wasting time and head to it. The place was kind of hard to find. The buildings were all noted with letter and number scale. I was standing by in front of the A1 building and needed to go to D1 building. I had taken the confirmation letter with me as well as my ID and my passport. When I found the center and got upstairs, they had these block cube-shaped seats along the hallway. 2 of the 3 of them were occupied, so instead of remaining standing, I sat down on one. While seated there, I could sense that my body was starting to respond nervously. I was feeling this tightness in my chest and thought I should try the breathing techniques. And Nigel asked, did they help? I said a little. I was trying to stay as calm as I could. When I opened my eyes again, the nerves would still be there. It was like that feeling I have just before surgery, like closing my eyes helped, but when I opened them again, the feelings were even more intense. It was very hard to find that center. So I couldn't close my eyes and stay focused. I stared at the floor. Doing that, I noticed the color, shape, and overall contour of the floor. It was a strange place. The carpet, instead of being a normal carpet, looked like tiles. They were in this sort of diagonal format. It reminded me of kitchen tiles, and I thought that it was strange. I could even remember seeing a stain on one of them. It was just me looking for distraction in that place. So I sat like that for close to half an hour. Within that time span, around 14 or 15 other people had arrived. They were an even mix of men and women, probably from half dozen or so different countries. Generally, there's always this low hum, people chatting with one another. and no one was speaking. It was oddly quiet, and I assumed that it was about each person leaving their own nerves, having their own nerves to contend with. And Nigel said, nervous energy. Could you sense it? In hindsight, yes, but while sitting in the thick of it, not really. It made me think of birds growing still just before an earthquake I experienced about 10 years ago. It was that uncanny silence. Everyone seemed to have the same thoughts coursing through their minds. And Nigel said, what was the thought? I said, the magnitude of it. The notion that this is such a huge step. People don't always think about it, but the idea of citizenship is a part of a person's identity. And to make that conscious choice of applying for citizenship in another place, it's a huge one because for most people, the idea is automatic. I was born in the US, I'm an American, and to suddenly decide that I want to be something other than more than an American is in some instances frowned upon, but in other instances is accepted. The thought of becoming a German citizen does not diminish who I am or where I was born, but it enhances me as an individual. So taking this test suddenly brings to the forefront, how I choose to identify myself. Nigel says, is that why it took so long for you to make the choice? I said, yes. It probably had an even greater impact than I could have thought. It also was before they changed the rules and I could keep my other citizenship, thus becoming a dual citizen. Nigel says, how do you feel now about this choice? I said, I feel good about it. I am who I am, but I no longer see becoming a German citizen as an attack on the part of me that is American. I cannot change where I am from. I do sometimes feel sad about what America has become. Nigel says, yes, but you also realize that it does not define you spiritually. So keeping that focus on the spiritual, what happened next? I said, so the young man steps up and introduces himself and his colleague. He begins letting people into the room after checking everyone's ID. When I come into the room, the first thing I see are all the tables and white chairs. It looks like a room that you'd go into for some sort of spiritual interview. The chairs have wheels on them and an envelope, and on them was an envelope and a pen. I went to a table in the second row and sat down. I had, as instructed, my phone and my ID. I had also taken a pen. The rest of my stuff, backpack, purse, and jacket, I had to leave in the back of the room. I asked myself why I needed my phone. The guy asked us to write our name on the envelope, so I did. Then we were told to put our phones into the envelope and seal them. They then collected the phones. It was at that moment when I felt as though I was in this very serious situation. I mean, I didn't think about the phone as my connection to the world, but I thought that the severity of the test, the significance of what I was about to do. It was at that moment when I asked myself if I was even going to get through this. And Nigel said, why did you ask yourself that? I said, I don't know. I sensed a very strong energy shift. I don't know why I sensed it or if it was my intention or imagination, but it felt like collectively every person in that room had the same feeling. This is serious. We have to, as a group, pass this test. It wasn't just me, an individual taking a test. It was an entire group of strangers sitting in this room with the same exact intention. I didn't speak to a single person in the group, and no one spoke to me. But it felt energetically like we were all in the same boat. We all knew that so much was riding on this. About 5 minutes later, the man begins handing out the tests, and each person has a test with the name and address printed on it. The nationality was also there. Before doing that, he explains what we have to do, how to fill in our answers, as well as sign the last page. It was very meticulous, which I think added to my nervousness. Nigel said, you closed your eyes just before you started. What was that, to calm yourself? I said, Sunshine said that I should do this before starting, to center my mind so that is what I did. I was so nervous, but the guy finally had finished and told us to start. I had not even touched the pages until he said to start. So I checked the name and address and made sure it was all right. I opened it and noticed the instructions. 2 minutes later, I had reached question number 1. And Nigel says, "What were you thinking as you filled in the answers?" I said I was thinking it was easy. Everything that Sunshine told me yesterday literally washed over me. There was one question that I couldn't remember the answer to, and so I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. When I opened them again, the answer came to me. There was another question with "not" in it. What is not the branch of German government? I think it was the question. As I answered it, I smiled because I recalled what Sunshine had suggested. I looked for the familiar answers, and for just about every question I found them. Everything that Sunshine suggested came to fruition during that test. It only took me 10 minutes to answer every question and to go back over them and make sure I had the answers I had wanted marked in. It was pretty amazing how spot on my guides have been in relation to this test. As I finished and got up to turn the papers in, the guy asked me if everything was correct with my name and address. I said yes, it was all correct. It felt at that moment that I wasn't just affirming that my information was correct, but that the whole test was correct. That is how good I felt. When I got my phone back, I felt like I was back in the real world. I collected my belongings from the back of the room and slipped out into the hallway. I decided to check the one answer I had been uncertain about, only to discover that it was actually correct. It was at that moment that I realized that I had not only passed the test, but may have actually reached my goal and intention of a perfect score. And Nigel says, "We're all very proud of you." And then Fred Rogers comes in and says, "I knew you'd do it. You make us all proud." I said, "Thank you. But there's a reason to this. But is there a reason for me to outline all of this in detail?" Nigel says, "Yes, you will see in the coming months that your actions might inspire others. So thank you for being honest about your impressions." I said, I'm glad it's behind me." And Nigel says, "Yes, I can imagine we are as well." So that was the end of the meditation. And I think this card really encapsulated how I felt while I was in that room. I had combined energy with other people in that room, but for the most part, I was on my own. This was my challenge. This was my obstacle that I had to get over. And in doing so, I was isolated in that sense, but not in the sense of, well, let me just check the book. But I was not isolated in the sense that this was my challenge alone. Everybody in that room had that same challenge. Everyone had the same thing going on. They wanted to find what it is that they needed for themselves. And so here's the description of this card from the book. The hermit stands on a solitary path. Dressed in a simple plain robe, he carries only his staff to support him and a lantern that illuminates his way. He is depicted as an elderly man with white hair and beard, representing the wisdom of his years. His expression is one of peace. He is comfortable in his solitude and his quest for inner knowledge. And then it says interpretation is the hermit signifies careful thought and contemplation. Withdraw from the outside world in order to reflect and find inner wisdom. This card indicates that you have all the answers that you need within yourself, but perhaps you need some introspection to access them. That definitely signifies what I went through yesterday, what I experienced during those half hour or so that I was in that room. And it signifies probably what every single person in that room also felt, that there was this sort of sense of being on your own and having to dig deep to find what it is you needed, the answers that you needed. So very apropos card. I'm going to pull one more card just to see. And this is the Two of Cups. And from what I understand is about sharing. That the Two of Cups is about sharing. There's two people here There's two faces, and I think that the Two of Cups is about, it's about that idea of sharing. But let me check here. Here we go, Two of Cups. A man and woman gaze into each other's eyes with undivided attention. The blonde woman and brown-haired man represent the combination of two opposite polarities. Note that the bright light in the heavens extended down in a ring encompassing the male and female, aligning each upon each cup, which appears to draw and hold them together. This is the card of union. The ace has now progressed into two energies, male and female. This beautiful card is always a welcome sight with regard to romantic relationships. When the Two of Cups appears, it shows growth in a relationship, whether in a stage you have reached together. It represents moving to the next level. Okay. Well, I look at this in regard to my husband and me. After the test was over, we came together and we celebrated this, the unity of us together. So that's the meditation for today. Thank you for being here, and I wish you a wonderful day. And my husband just came home. So speaking of Two of Cups, so I wish you a wonderful day. Thank you for being here and for listening, and take care. And as always, namaste.